Hi, welcome to Morning Talk. I'm Aaron. Today I'm going to bring you my interview with John Vervaeke from the University of Toronto. What brought him to my attention was a series of videos he has up on YouTube of lectures, 1 hour lectures called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And throughout the course of the lectures, he gives a history of Western thought and kind of some ways that maybe our thinking has been skewed and we've moved towards life seeming meaningless. And it's really interesting because he is not approaching it from a religious context. It's unusual to hear someone talking about meaning and the importance of meaning from kind of a scientific and psychological standpoint. So I found that really interesting. I found it really just useful. And so I recommend that series. He's about 30 in right now, and there's going to be 50 episodes. I know 50 hours seems like a lot, but if this kind of thing interests you, I think it'll be well worth your time. So also, as a conversationalist, he's probably one of the most generous and engaged conversationalists I've ever spoken to. I'm really hoping to get to speak to him again in the future. So like and subscribe to this if you like this kind of content. I'd love to bring you more of it. So without further ado, here is my conversation with John Vervaeke. Yeah, so John Vervaeke, Park, it's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Just because, yeah, you have very little for this. I have this YouTube channel that I'm starting up, and it's my own way. I hadn't heard of you when I started working on it, but in my own way, it's an attempt to help with the meaning crisis. Although
Great.
I had not put those words to it until I found. So I have a couple of videos so far, one of which is kind of exploring and critiquing the Jordan Peterson phenomena with a guy called Paul Vanderklay, who's sort of somewhat of an expert on him. And then the other one was a right out of left field for most people, and it was an interview with Sargent, who's flat Earth, like the leading light of the flat Earth movement, if you can call it that.
Yeah.
And I thought that talking to you about the flat Earth would be a really interesting, it's a really interesting test case, or a really maybe extreme version of some things that you talk about. I should preface the conversation by saying that I have a odd and kind of warm view towards the flat Earth movement, because unlike all the articles I've ever read about it, I have a feeling that the impetus for wanting to believe it comes from a legitimate place of need that's been created by maybe the psychological conditions in the West and in the world in general. And my introduction, and I'm sorry to give you a little bit.
No, take your time, please.
Biography here, but when my daughter was born, so she's my second child, I was my desire to understand my own mind and the world went into absolute overdrive. And being from a evangelical Christian background, the first thing I turned my spotlight on was my personal faith.
Sure.
Time, I discovered that these long, wordy videos about why the Earth is flat on YouTube. It just blew my mind, but I had this curiosity as to if my beliefs had any comparison to the flat Earth, just because the flat Earth was so wild,
right,
and Christianity is so accepted. The idea of belief really came to the front of my mind, and I watched these things without a lot of judgment. I even found myself hoping that the flat Earth would find a champion that would TV, you know, and even though I never have believed that the earth was flat, but I never hated them either. So
Yeah.
I wanted to preface the conversation by saying I actually don't want to insult the flat earth. I think they've had that done a million times. And in my interview with Mark Sargent, which you might actually find interesting once it's up, he was really candid about the spiritual aspect and
Sure.
the aspect of meaning that they find in the flat earth. So before we dive into that, I'm hoping that the video will attract flat earth people and John Vervaeke people. But for the flat earth people, could you describe briefly your idea about the meaning crisis and briefly what your book is about?
Sure. Okay. So first of all, I know Paul. We just did an interview together. There's a YouTube episode of that up. If you want to watch it, him and I discussing. We're going to have another discussion sometime in August.
Wow.
So you might find that interesting.
I will.
And I would also recommend you might want to take a look at the YouTube posting that Jonathan Pajot did as part of the Symbolic World, because he has one on the flat Earth, which is much more sympathetic along the lines that you are pointing to. And he also, in ways that I think are convergent but perhaps different from me, thinks it has to do with the meaning crisis. And I know Jonathan quite well too. So I would recommend those two things if it make connections to what you're talking about. I should maybe just say a little bit about who I am. I'm John Vervaeke. I'm an assistant, hopefully soon, associate professor at the University of Toronto in cognitive psychology and cognitive science. Cognitive science is interdisciplinary. You have to get training in like philosophy, linguistics, psychology, machine learning, neuroscience, things like that. And then you try to integrate them all together. And I put that integration together in order to try and address what I think is a central problem facing the West, perhaps the world, to which Western culture is imposed on the world, for good or for ill. And that is what I've been calling the meaning crisis. And there's just very broadly, there's two aspects of the crisis. There's a historical argument about what happened to our worldview, which is what we're going to be talking about exactly today, right? What happened to our worldview such that people feel increasingly radically disconnected from themselves, from each other, from reality. They have no framework to guide them, to cultivate wisdom, self-transcendence. If they have anomalous experiences, mystical or otherwise, they have nothing, no good guidance other than sort of a negative therapeutic, no, or oh no thing. But they have non-pathological mystical experiences, awakening experience, large number of 30 to 40% of the population, and they have no framework to, what to do with this challenge that's given to them. They feel like they've come into contact with something more real. What do they do with it, right? Or on the other hand, they fall into, existential despair, or even like yourself, significant existential questioning. And many of them do not have, nor do they find it viable to take up what you have. I don't know if you still consider yourself an evangelical Christian, but if you are, you have, okay, well, a lot of people are in that place, okay?
Yeah.
A lot of people are there, okay? Right?
Yeah.
And so that's exactly, what framework can they bring to bear? And I don't just mean a theoretical framework. I don't mean lacking a theoretical framework. It should have one, but it's not reducible to a theoretical framework. It has to be a whole existential, right, framework for how to respond to either these things that are either calling us to try and transcend or threatening us with despair and nihilism. And so we have these perennial problems, that beset us, and then we have historical forces that come upon us. So I have training that allows me to talk about that historical progress, at least in some important aspects of it. And then I also, as a cognitive scientist and cognitive psychologist, I do a lot of work on this. I have a lot of training on how we cultivate meaning, what it might mean to cultivate wisdom, what it might mean to understand these awakening experiences in a non-dismissive manner. And so I've been trying to, as best as I can, integrate a historical argument and a scientific argument, really address this question about how can we address these historical forces and get a worldview that resituates us, and how can we align that with our best understanding of our meaning cultivation machinery so that we can give people a way of responding to this meaning crisis. So that's what my project is. The book that I did with Christopher Mastropietro and Filip Miscevic was a first book in a 4-book series, and it was basically a book introducing people to the meaning crisis via what we think is an important cultural symbolic expression of it, which is this explosion of interest in zombies and the zombie apocalypse. And we argue in that book, and we just posted last week a discussion between Chris and I, where we went through very carefully why we think the zombie mythology is exactly the mythology of the meaning crisis right now. And so that's what the first book is about.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. I'm excited to get into your books. I've been really diving into the 26-part meaning crisis. I've listened to them all. And to be perfectly honest, now that I'm up to 26, I think I'm going to start again and listen from the beginning. So I feel like there's something wrong with me to be able to listen to that many hours of something, but it's just it's so on. I mean, it's been the perfect combination, just a gush of confirming of some things that have been on my mind, but also challenging. So things like you're critical of the secularization of that happened with Hegel and such, and you're also critical of the autodidact. And I consider myself to be an autodidact, sort of trying to secularize religion. So anyway, I've appreciated it. I have a question that should be simple. Are there plan for how many more of those are going to be? We're up to cognitive science now.
Yeah, so we just released the 27th video on Friday, and so the series is divided equally, right? There's basically 25 episodes that trace the historical argument, and it pivots on 25 and into 26, and then the second half is the cognitive scientific argument, which is, and it takes that much. What is this meaning machinery that we're talking about? What's going on there? Why is it so important? And can we use that to understand? If we get a cognitive scientific understanding of meaning machinery, can we use that? And I mean, again, in a non-dismissive way, to understand these processes that we've been talking. And of course, there's been cognitive science all throughout the historical, and then that gets picked up and developed in the second half. So there's going to be another 25 episodes. We're almost done filming. So it'll go to 50 episodes. And so what happens is I go through the cognitive science, and I try to present what I think is an insightful account of this meaning machinery, and then use it to articulate many of the aspects of what's labeled spirituality. But the point is, I hope I can persuade people at least of the value that I can give a coherent, integrated, and I hope theoretically insightful and hopefully existentially important understanding of all these things, rather than just having a loose umbrella, right? And then I dive into these perennial problems. Why do we lose meaning, and what are the responses to that? And then after bringing that all together, then there's a sort of a final 4 episodes, which we're just about to film, where I put the response to the meaning crisis that I've argued for into, I hope, a creative dialogue of a network of people that I think are also harbingers of the meaning crisis. People like Heidegger, Barfield, Jung, Tillich, Nishitani, and then the series ends with sort of hopefully giving my response, setting it into a context. So there's a lot of richness there for people to discuss and reflect on how to respond to the meaning crisis. So that's how it's going.
That's amazing. And you said hopefully insightful for the first 25. I would say definitely insightful.
Thank you.
It's listening to this. I mean, turn this video off and go listen to those 25. But what I'm hoping to, like I say, add to that work, it also reminds me of I feel a feeling of the Great Commission. The Great Commission from Christianity.
Yeah.
And I had get into it. I want to ask the question, but I had a spiritual, mystical feeling experience.
Good.
Years ago, precipitated in such an interesting way. I felt like I heard the voice of God, and then after, I mean, not literally the voice of God, after that, I've had a mental energy level
Yep.
to
Yep.
follow an idea through
Yeah.
that
Yep.
I truly did not have before. And I'm trying to, it was a deity that spoke to me, but I am wondering, do you have a similar situation? Did you have one or two kind of very specific points in time where you had some kind of revelatory experience?
So first of all, let
Maybe you
me.
didn't.
No. Thank you. First of all, I want to reinforce what I think is the authenticity. So I've done quite a bit of. I just presented at the SPP conference in San Diego. Many people have these awakening experiences. Yaden's done some work on it. Griffiths has done some work on it. Newberg has done work on it. And so, a lot of people have it, and a lot of people, it lines up with other work on what's called quantum change theory. Bad name for a psychological theory. It has nothing to do with quantum mechanics. But anyways, right, the number of people that have these experiences and they feel called. There's kind of a normative demand put on them to transform their lives, right, and transform, themselves. And the research is showing that many people, in fact, do this, and that they, by a lot of measures, many of them objective, their lives get better across the board. You're nodding, and so
Yeah.
I want to just. I guess what I'm trying to do is just encourage you to, savor and appreciate the value of your experience, because I don't think it's an experience because what I'm saying is our culture tends to be at least explicitly dismissive of that, which is unfortunate because, it looks like around 40% of the population are having these non-pathological, beneficial, transformative states, and we need to take that back into account. Even into our psychological and cognitive modeling. So I just wanted to say that to you. I wanted to sort of, I guess, if it matters to you, I'm just trying to validate your experience.
Well, I appreciate that. No, I really do appreciate it. Based on everything I've heard from you so far in your lectures, I felt that I didn't feel that you would criticize it. Kind of one of the things that's been so affirming. I think the idea, one of the things about in the meaning crisis, that this idea of certainty crept to Christianity, really, or not just Christianity, crept into cognition across the board in a way that is super healthy. It's a complete mystery to me what happened to me that day, but it's a mystery in a way. Or what came to mind was the scripture about. It's in Acts, I think. Paul in Athens, when he.
Well, in God we live and move and have our being.
Well, it's the one about actually the one about to the unknown God. Do you remember that?
Yes, yeah, and he's on the Areopagus, and he's addressing the unknown God, and then he says, and some of your poets have, and I think most people think it's a Stoic poet, right? Some of your poets have said, in him we live and move and have our being. Yeah, that's it. I know that passage very well.
Yeah, that's how I feel now. I feel like actually I don't feel like Paul, who has the certainty of I know the God that I feel like the people the statue to the unknown God, I feel that, and I feel some real I don't know, real comfort in that, I guess, because of 30 whatever years of feeling I needed to be certain. So I don't know. I'm flipping the scripture around. I guess I'm taking it wrong, but
no, you're not. No. I mean, you can identify with who you want in the story. I was pointing out that, and maybe this is helpful, that Paul was pointing to something that sounds to me like one of these experiences. This experience of something that's so profound that you feel like in it you live and move and have your being. So I was pointing that I think, although you may not be touching the God that Paul had in mind, I think you were touching an experience. You've had an experience that he's definitely alluding to, because I think that's clearly what's going on in the poetry that he's quoting.
The strength. I think there's a strength. Thank you. I think there's a strength in the idea of acknowledging no God.
Totally.
Huge strength, actually. There's actually a pathology to knowledge of that. What the things you've said have really pointed that out to me.
That's going to be part of. So, I mean, I'm just gesturing. I'm going to give arguments for this, so I don't want people jumping on me. But I mean, right? But I'm going to be giving arguments that if we get this deeper sense of meaning, we can recover, because it's not de novo with me, but we can recover an alternative notion of the sacred that is not pinned to a supernatural object that we have to have a stable, certain grasp on, but instead we should think of sacredness as as getting into a deep contact, coupling with an inexhaustible aspect of reality that is an ongoing source of our ability to, um, to generate meaning, and that meaning generation shouldn't be thought to be any kind of project that comes to a culmination or final conclusion. So, and many people are arguing right now for that, even in theological circles. It goes back to at least people like Schlegel and others, and I think you can maybe make an argument that Coleridge, whether or not Barfield takes it up from Coleridge is something I'm still exploring, so I'm not confident to talk about that. But this notion of sacredness, right, as this inexhaustibleness that constantly affords the capacity for self-transcendence, rather than being a stable thing that we have to get it. So it has some of that element of permanent transgression in it from the Gnostics, right, that I talked about. So I'm going to try and articulate that alternative sense of sacredness precisely because, well, two things. I think it follows out of the argument I'm making, but also because I think it is articulating what a lot of people like you are talking to me about, that they're getting this alternative sense of sacred where that old model just is not describing their experience well. And so I have these sort of two. I've got the empirical evidence from people I'm talking to saying, no, this new way of talking about sacredness that resonates with me. And then I've got this cognitive scientific argument about meaning making, and I think I'm going to try and show that the two come very well together. So you may find that helpful.
Oh, I mean, I will find it helpful, John. I like it. This has been discovering that series, has just brought so many things. I don't want to get. I feel like I could talk to you all day, but I do want to get on to flat Earth and just see. First of all, are you familiar with the flat Earth and what's? You said you've watched, or that John Vervaeke has talked about it.
Oh, before I forget, I'll answer your question. We don't have to discuss it. Yes, I have had actually several, many people would call mystical experiences. Many, in fact, in my life. Because I've been practicing for a very long time, a lot of transformative practices. Meditation, contemplation, pranayama, lectio divina, right? So I've had many experiences. So if you're concerned that I'm only speaking from the outside theoretically, that's not the case. I'm also speaking from the inside experientially.
I wasn't really concerned. I just wanted to hear it. I don't think anybody could talk these the way you do. There's a weird combination of academic with practical passion. Like from you, I get the sense of like, I've known a lot of really great pastors in my life. My father's a pastor who is largely responsible for the way my brain works, to be honest. And there's a feeling I get from you that's pastor-like, just in that way of like when nobody's around and you're by yourself, this is what's on your mind, and it's not just a job, And
thank you for saying that. I think Paul does that. Paul Vanderklay. I think Paul does that for people too, and I also think Jonathan does that too. I mean, Jonathan has a very astute way of mixing some very, I think, philosophically astute semiotic interpretations of symbolism with tremendous sort of personal and existential import for people. So I think those two men also, and I think the woman who's struggling. I mean that in a complimentary way with these questions. I don't know her last name. Her first name is Sevilla, and she does quality existence. And she's trying to use Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance as sort of a framework within which to wrestle with the meaning crisis. I think she also is doing that same kind of integration that you're talking about. So there's many people who are trying to do, in my mind at least, the thing you're pointing to in my work. And that's also very encouraging for me.
Okay, great. I'm gonna look that up. Because there does seem to be a lot of men in this, so it'd be great to.
I would like to talk. I would really. I'm happy if she'd like. go on her YouTube channel. She's done a few episodes about me and my work. I would be very happy to talk to her. I'd love to have her on my channel at some point. Yeah, I think she's really, 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 really interesting. Anyways, to your point, I've watched 2 or 3 videos. Viewers probably know, both from the series and from some of my interviews, that I don't like the form of rationality that's about sort of, debunking and just destroying people. I think that undermines the Socratic approach to rationality that I'm deeply convinced is the right path for understanding and unpacking rationality. Now, I do think, if insofar as let me just be clear, insofar as earthers are claiming to refute scientific theories, then at that level, it's fair game to respond and say, no, here's the evidence, here's the theoretical argument, right? And I don't feel compelled to do that, because a lot of people are doing that. I'm more talking now about what you're talking about. I'm talking about the tone and the framework from which that's happening. If people are just saying, well, these people are presenting, a theory, for want of a better word, although in science, theory is a much more meaningful term than it is in everyday discourse. And let's say they're presenting a hypothesis. Perhaps that's better. They're presenting a hypothesis. Here's their arguments and the evidence. Here's my counter arguments, and here are the counter evidence. And the counter arguments and the counter evidence are just overwhelming, and they've been overwhelming for a very long time. So I don't really feel a need to talk about that aspect of it, right? What I'm more concerned about is what you're concerned about, and I think what Jonathan has been concerned about is exactly what is it that motivating people to undertake this, because they are clearly for an alternative worldview. That's the level at which we're talking here. And I'm as you know from the series, I'm very, very interested in worldviews about, this agent-arena relationship, the attempt to get some kind of attunement between them, and within that, right, what does that mean? And the trend. And so I think it is fair to say that the flat Earth phenomena is pitched at this level of the agent-arena relationship, and what people are trying to propose is an alternative worldview in which they feel, not without some legitimacy, they could find the meaning that they've lost. I mean, Peter Berger and Chris and I are using this in the second book. He had this notion of a sacred canopy. People used to feel the cosmos like a sacred canopy that was over them, and it provided. Yeah, the firmament, and not only that, the structure of the cosmos was basically a teacher, right? It was an educator. It exemplified and taught people how to become better people. I forget the author of the book, the wonderful book called The Wisdom of the World, where he articulates this idea of the world being this almost like this grand tutor, right? Or grand mentor that would lead us. Right. And what people, I think, rightly feel, and Chris and I talked about this, and Chris and I and Filip talked about it in the book as well, right? Our worldview doesn't give that. When we look out, we just have what Pascal worried about, those infinite spaces that terrify. There's nothing in our worldview that seems to have that role of exemplifying, teaching, and guiding me in the cultivation of meaning and wisdom. And I think part of what's happening with the meaning crisis people is there's 2 things going on. There's an attempt to get back to a worldview that seems to work for us because it is so consonant with our phenomenological experience. That's Jonathan Pajot's point. And I think it is also allied with, which I don't know if Jonathan talked about that very much, I don't remember, also a Gnostic thing going on here, because what's going on here is also it's integrated with a conspiracy theory, often a grand conspiracy theory, right? And remember, the Gnostics have this idea that what's keeping us from our meaning is that there's this network of beings in higher power who are are imprisoning us in a false worldview. That's actually, and so there's also the Gnostic. So I see in the flat Earth, I see the attempt to get back to a worldview in which the cosmos is a mentor. I'm struggling for a word, but is a mentor. Yeah. Sure. Allied with also the Gnostic attempt to respond to the meaning crisis. I feel trapped, and there must be a conspiracy behind this entrapment. So that's
Awesome. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No. I'll just keep talking. So
Yeah, I have the tendency to do the same. But so that actually is. I was going to specifically ask you about whether there's a Gnostic element to this, because you were saying that I'd never heard World War II described Gnostic nightmare take place the way that Hitler and I guess the psyche of the German people brought together these various elements to this Gnostic nightmare. So I wonder if the flat Earth is kind of a Gnostic fever dream, if not a nightmare, but a Gnostic, I don't know what, because it's not exactly the same. It's not causing them to do horrible things.
No.
This sense of needing to, there's a sense of outside forces. There's a conspiracy, and that's something that I was hoping to talk to you about. So I'm so glad you mentioned it on your own.
Yep. So I think that's that. I mean, the thing that's intoxicating, and I'm trying to pick up on both aspects of that word. Intoxication is both something and sort of opens us up, but there's also toxicity in it, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So the thing that's intoxicating about conspiracy theories is that they give a narrative structure to our suffering, right? They create a story in which the forces at work are people, and their motives are really intelligible. And if I'm the victim of the conspiracy, I have a central role in that narrative. I'm not peripheral. And so it gives a tremendous, and what it does is it converts your sense of suffering into a sense of entrapment, a sense of being entrapped, misled, and then that gives you the hope that you can break through.
Yeah.
You can have that.
It also,
go ahead.
It also gives you, in my view, it gives you a very tight-knit group. You can find a community. There's no tighter and stronger than people who are battling an obvious force.
That's right.
An evil force.
Yes, exactly. So that's exactly it. That's what I mean. That's a good point. That by sort of it configures you at the center of this narrative. And if people agree with you about the narrative, then you will be drawn together. You will be centered together. You will be cohered together. So you're going to get a communitas with other people, and you're going to get a narrative that makes sense. And not only it gives you a call to action, it tells you what to do, right, in order to respond to the conspiracy. And if what you're doing is giving what it seems like you're doing is giving them a worldview that is consonant with their phenomenological experience and makes the universe a home, a mentoring home, then that's going to be deeply, deeply attractive to people.
Right. And what I find fascinating and what I think is actually the great opportunity of the flat Earth phenomena, that they're very open and candid. Like Mark Sargent and I did not have any disagreement when we talked about meaning. He got into his newfound spirituality and openness of the new spirituality that he has. It's because the object of their because the in this case like NASA and the Illuminati or whoever, because they're a real in their minds a real force, and because the Earth, there's a physical element to what they're saying, they don't even mind saying that, like, yeah, we just find meaning in this. Like, once somebody's not yelling at them anymore about like two sticks a few miles apart and measuring the shadows, once you're not yelling at them, he was perfectly happy to say, like there was this great sense of meaning. There was a feeling that someone built this dome that we're under, and so that whoever that is and cares, or and we're cared for, or so they're fairly explicit about it. No, you.
What I was going to say is, so there's a lot of work. Where's this book? I don't know. There's this Scarcity, right? This book.
Okay.
And there's a lot of work done by, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I've never heard it spoken. I think it's Mourning, but if I get it wrong, I apologize. But the work on scarcity mentality is that when there's a scarcity of things, right, a scarcity of some resource, you can see a sort of bunch of behaviors. And I think what I would argue what we're seeing not just in the flat earthers, but in many other groups that Chris and I call the neo-Gnosticism, not neo-Nazism, neo-Gnosticism, right? And this is clearly an instance of neo-Gnosticism, right? What we see in that, right, is the response to a scarcity of meaning. And so meaning has become so scarce in these people's lives and in other people's lives. Again, I'm not talking about just them, but the context of the discourse that we're having is them, right? And so there is such a scarcity of meaning that, right, the value of obtaining this meaning has been severed, right, from the concern, I think, ultimately with truth, and that's where. And that's where I mean, I'm trying to be critical, but I'm trying to be critical in a way that isn't dismissive. So the thing in general about, you remember when I did in the 26th episode, I made an argument for plausibility, right? That you want a lot of evidence converging to your central idea, and then you want that idea to be able to explain many different things. Yes.
Yeah.
Remember? Right. And so conspiracy theories have the one side. If you give them, it explains a lot. And the explaining we're talking about here is not just not just theoretical. This is existential explanation. This is not just giving an answer. This is making meaningful connections so that they can live their lives in new ways. So it's just powerfully elegant in that. But it's how they come up with the construct is not usually not in a highly trustworthy manner, right? And so the concern for that, then, the concern is that you're getting into, I mean, there's a, you set the context for this discourse, and I'm trying to be very respectful of it. So, there's an element of bullshitting here. There's an element of the salient of the explanation making them indifferent to careful, convergence on the truth. And so I would say, for all my attempts to charitably understand them, which I want to do, I would say that my understanding also extends to saying I think there's a huge self-deceptive aspect going on here. Because in general, most conspiracy theories are and then what the conspiracy theorist always says, but some conspiracy theories are true. Yeah. But I need specific evidence that that's specifically the case here.
Yeah. No, I know what you're saying, and I think that's true. I mean, it's particularly dismissive because I'm going to say a funny sentence, but if the Earth is round, then obviously there is a element of self-deception going on. If the Earth is flat, then we're the ones deceived. But I think that's the case. But the other element I wanted to ask you about, and it's something you've touched on a little bit in your series, but my perception is that the intuition itself is under a bit of an attack at the moment. That and I could be wrong. I'm totally open to critique on this, but it seems to me like that we know that to form a scientific hypothesis, you need intuition. But then once you've got that, the idea is almost to take intuition out of the equation. And I just personally like there's a documentary called Say. It's like I'm not sure. I think you would enjoy it. It has some interesting people like Chris, who you may or may not have heard of.
Work. I'd like to talk to him directly someday, but I know
I would love to talk to him, not just because his accent makes me feel so calm and nice. Such a nice man. So yeah, my thought is that intuition is under attack, and that, like, the object of our intuition can be good or can be correct or incorrect, and is almost always a combination of correct and incorrect, because it's beyond the mist of articulated knowledge, right? So our intuition, but I feel like if intuition is discouraged, I think it is, but it's really just an intuition that this is happening. I don't have evidence.
Okay.
But something very appealing about just going with your intuition, and going against the grain, and like Does that bring anything up in your mind?
Yeah, it does. I mean, so there's stuff both in the first half of the series and the second half of the series that I think points to that. First of all, I do talk about intuition. I talk about it in connection with flow, for example, and the work that Leo Ferraro and I published. And I think we're getting to a good account of what intuition is and how it works. This machinery of implicit learning, and potentially an insight cascade and things like that. And that goes back to the work of Hogarth. I think of maybe Reber. Although I don't know if Reber would completely agree with that. I don't think he would disagree. So that's an interesting question. I think there's a place in, first of all, our psychology for like really acknowledging this phenomena and acknowledging its importance. Secondly, there is, and this will become clear in the second half of the series. There, as you said, there is much that we do that is, in a very sense, pre-inferential. Before we can make our inferential processes, we have to do all this other work. And you've also seen that at the beginning of the series, and even the most current episode that's up on problem formulation. Before I can start doing any reasoning or problem solving, I have to first formulate my problem well. And that matter of construal is non-inferential in nature. It's indispensable. It's not infallible. It is far from infallible, but it's indispensable. And we have to accept both of those together. We have to reject that. You know, we should reject. I do not like it when we either demonize, which you're pointing to, one of our faculties, or we make it a divine thing. My intuition is neither. Right, it is indispensable to me, and it puts me into access to with participatory knowing and that deeper primordial machinery by which the agent in a relationship coupling gets going, right? And so intuition is indispensable, but it's also far from infallible. I've already articulated in this. There's many ways, and so my answer to that, in which is, well, what you should do is you should bring back intuition back into your epistemology, but talk about a normative theory on intuition. How do you make intuition operate well, right? And that what we should be looking for, right, is neither a dismissal nor some sort of worshipful acceptance of the pronouncements of our intuition. What we should do is get a good understanding of it, and from that get a clearer understanding of what good intuition is like and how we can best cultivate it. So that's my response to that. And so I think we should, I agree with you, we shouldn't be dismissing intuition, but on the other hand, I don't think we should just accept it in an uncritical common sense fashion.
Right, yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things that you've kind of answered the problem in a way, but it's a complicated answer. But wisdom, because you about wisdom and you speak about it in a way that implies it's a real thing, and I think that's the idea, is that wisdom would temper everything. Wisdom would temper temper our intuition. Wisdom would tell us, okay, you've done enough intuiting now. Go back to your to what you know and see if you can make some connections, and keeps it going back and forth like that. So yeah, that's really cool.
I definitely think wisdom is a real thing. Igor Grossman put together what he called the Toronto Wisdom Task Force, in which we got some of, the premier people doing work on wisdom within psychology and cognitive science. And we were in a room. I think it's going to be uploaded onto YouTube if anybody wants to watch it. It goes for, I think, like 6 or 7 hours, because we're talking and really arguing. So this is a real thing. What's going to happen in the series is I'm going to try to articulate two things, and I hope this does not sound pretentious. So I'm again asking for people's patience and indulgence, because I put a lot of time and effort to just articulating this and not just stating it. I'm going to try and give a cognitive scientific theory of what enlightenment, like what it is to have a comprehensive ability to respond to all of these perennial problems and afford self-independence, and how to incorporate these exceptional experiences. And I'm also going to, and that's like 2 or 3, I think, episodes. And then I devote, I think, 3 or 4 episodes to what's wisdom. Come around back to that question. That's also towards the end. So can we, once we build this cognitive scientific machinery of meaning cultivation, can we integrate it with, right, all these other things to get a deeper sense of what would enlightenment mean for us, and what does wisdom mean for us? And therefore, this question I think we can now start to talk about in an intelligible way. What is it to wisely cultivate enlightenment? What is that? And what does that look like? How can that be both individually and collectively pursued?
That's great. So you said something about sounding pretentious to take that much time to get to. And I would say, I would like to affirm you and say that you have presented the meaning crisis in a way that's sufficiently complicated to have truth to it. And I think people who got heavily into Jordan Peterson, I was going to try not to bring up Jordan Peterson in the time, but I was one of the people who was obsessively watching him. The reason was his worldview was sufficiently complicated and sufficiently kind of depressing to be real. And so the fact that it took you 20 episodes to get to the need for cognitive science, to get through the history of the progression of cognition throughout history, to people who have the intuition that crisis, we know that it's going to have to be complicated. It's going to be a long explanation. The thing that concerns me is that you and I and many other people happen to find it life-giving to think about a problem that's 25 hours describing. And without any judgment whatsoever, there's a lot of society, truly not judging them at all, who don't have the mental energy. They have plenty of mental energy. Their mental energy is towards something else that's deeply meaningful and resonant with them, but they're still, in my view, they're still in need of hearing some of this meaning crisis stuff. So I'd love to figure out, and I'm excited about this, because I'd love to figure out what the practical way, the practical lived, embodied or ritualistic way, mythological way this is done, whether it's a new mythology, because I know there's Hegel and the people you've mentioned are kind of in favor of maybe a new mythology. But can you create a new mythology without it being without it being totally constricted to the ideology of the needle, the point of the spear where we are right now? You know what I mean? Can it?
That's very well said.
Can it be broad enough for us to go through the eye of that needle and transcend back a possibility? And so I had a thought that I wanted to I want to keep this to roughly an hour, which we're almost at. But
I can go a little bit longer if you wish.
Well, thank you very much, and I really appreciate your time. As I was preparing and think of what to ask you, I was thinking about this Gnosticism and the idea of needing to transcend or to get past forces that are kind of holding us back. And I think part of the intuition of genuine Gnostic thinking is that feeling that it's not like it's okay to think that there's an enemy or that there's an object that's holding us back, but it's better to think that there is something less. There's something less calculated. There's something that's less of a necessarily a consciousness. There's something related to actually our own consciousness that's holding us back that we need to transcend, and that's self-transcendence. I'm not saying anything new here, but what I wrote down here, I'll just read it because I don't know if I can properly, is that there's not enough respect necessarily for cognitive transcendence. So the idea that I got obsessed with the idea of epistemology a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago. And it occurs to me that so if Gnostics were thinking of of God as something we need to transcend, go a little further and say that we're always transcending our conception of God. That we're not transcending a real God. We're not going to come out on the other side, clearing, wiping our eyes, and now we don't need God anymore. I think that's one of the things that's like maybe like we need a new God. We need the unknown God, and we're kind of like one of the reasons that the Exodus and the the story of the Israelites in the desert, so people still, and it has this air of meaning, is that we are, in a sense, we called to nomads, or we need to be nomads. So we need to transcend the wilderness we're in to the next wilderness. What we do is we transcend. We get really excited. Like in things like and the scientific revolution, and then we get to a point where we need to transcend that because our conception of it has become rigid, and our conception of it has become an idea. And so there's always this. There always needs to be an unknown God, and that's kind of one of the greatest takeaways that I've had from. And feel free to disagree with it, but one of the things I've gotten from what you're saying.
And I'm going to try and argue that first of all, that was very well said.
Thank you.
And your way of reconfiguring, revalorizing the Exodus mythology, I think is really interesting, because it's typically been given a very teleological reading, that the point is to get to the culminating final place, whereas you're saying, no, it's this open-ended call to be forever nomads. And I like that rearticulation, because, like I said, I'm going to argue that this machinery of meaning cultivation is ultimately grounded in the machinery of relevance realization, which I'm starting to articulate, and that machinery is inherently open-ended in the way it has to operate, and that idea that what we're going to be doing is being immersed in an ongoing process, rather than focused at achieving a particular state. So we're gonna move from what's his name? It's what's the book? Where's the book? I'm trying to remember the book. There's a book called Philosophers Without Gods. And there's a guy in here. What's his name? I'm going to talk about him later. An article called Transcendence Without God on Atheism and Invisibility, Anthony Simon Layden. Before people get sort of upset about that, the transcendence without God, he's trying to articulate, and I think Paul Acosta does this also in his notion of secular wonder. He's trying to say that, well, there's two notions of transcendence. There's one what he calls the proximity notion, where the point of transcendence is to get close to the inherently transcendent thing. Or there's something, I think he calls it like a process or an activity version of transcendence. No, the point is transcendence itself, right? Yeah. And I think Nietzsche was trying to articulate this. He was trying to get back the notion of self-transcendence. But as I argued, I think he put it into a framework that ultimately misframes it in a certain way. So I agree with that. And I think that you can see people who I would regard as modern Gnostics. Tillich, famously, and I'm going to talk about him towards the end. Tillich famously argued for the God beyond the God of theism as the only solution to the meaning crisis. I mean, that's the core thesis of the Courage to Be, and it's a reflection of our ultimate concern, not our final conclusion. That's the thing about Tillich. It's about our ultimate concern, not our final conclusion. So I think you're going to find that not only do I already agree with what you're saying, but I think you're going to find that I'm going to articulate stuff that will give you, I hope, a richer vocabulary to articulate the very insightful thing you've already said about that this sort of constant open-ended transcendence is a better way of appreciating, and I mean that word very deeply, like music appreciation, art appreciation, of appreciating the sacred as a fount of inexhaustibility rather than a permanent location of finality.
Right. And if you think about it, the way I like to think about it, and I have absolute confidence that your future stuff is going to do exactly what you say for me. But
that's probably too high praise, but thank you.
But if you think about it, like it's not too hard to think back when we were children, and what our conception of certain things was, and how it was maybe functional in some ways, like maybe reading or something like that, and our early grasp of language. And I think we need to respect children and what they learn, and the way they learn, and the fallacies that they come across that are natural, logical fallacies. But I think that what I'd like to promote is an idea that even edge of all of the things we're doing, there's no reason to think that not still childlike.
Yes, as the child is to the adult is to the sage.
So exactly,
Yeah,
there you go.
yeah,
So
yeah.
the idea is to not disrespect our lack of knowledge, but respect the process. So respect the child and respect ourselves as children who need to continue moving forward. Children with, we don't know where the end goal is, and maybe that's one advantage that young children have, is not being wrapped up in what the end goal is. Or maybe the end goal is to be like daddy or mommy, but the conception of daddy and mommy is so mystical and magical that it's a beautiful goal. It's not a codified, here's the goal, you must reach this, done. It's there's always a future mommy or, I think that's all that God really has to be.
Well,
Is
it depends. I mean, I do. There's two things I want to say to that. One is we get something like that childlike, not childish, that childlike wonder within, if you look within the mystical traditions, and when people are describing these higher states of consciousness. And what's interesting is how much they do what Tillich is talking about, how much they, and many of them are, you can see that there's a struggle going on there, because some of them are within orthodox frameworks, but how much they're trying to get beyond the God of theism. And you have Eckhart talking about the Godhead and how it's beyond, right? In a very real sense, beyond God. And you've got, Carter's book, The Nothingness Beyond God. You have a lot of this language, right? If you read Pseudo Dionysius, right, and maybe Jonathan would disagree with me on this, but right, you get this sense of whatever you call God isn't God, right, and he's trying to open you up, but people need to understand, and this is what's important, that's not empty negation. He's opening that up precisely because he's already having experiences that are opening him up. Plotinus was having these experiences. They're not just negating. Right, what they're doing is it's negation in the service of trying to constantly open us up, because it's the trajectory, it's the ongoing trajectory that matters for, if you'll allow me, Ben, to term, that's the best way we represent the sacred or God, not in any picture we get, but our trajectory of transformation best exemplifies. I think that's what the mystic. That best exemplifies the sacred rather than any conclusion. Because here's what happens. When people come out of these states, I know this, I read the research, they will proclaim multiple different and often competing, contrasting metaphysics. Yeah. I'm not dissing metaphysics here. I think we should talk about the ultimate nature of reality philosophically and astutely and wisely. But what I'm saying is, people come out of this and say, now I know there is a God. And other people, now I know there isn't a God, or I realize Buddha nature, or I realize that if I meet the Buddha, I should kill the Buddha on the road, like the Zen. Right? And so you get all, I think if we try to understand the value of these articulations in terms of their propositional content, we're just going to fall onto grief, because we got massively pluralistic diversity, massive contradiction. And there's probably some people saying, but I know mine's the right one. And the problem is you're not acknowledging the other person saying exactly the same thing. Well, I think the procedure, the process is what's crucial.
I mean, maybe to be cheesy, when we get these things, it's the manna in the desert, where it's not the end. You don't stay where the manna is. You've found, it's not a super satisfying thing. You need to keep moving. You don't have the final goal. You have something that keeps you moving.
Do you remember to pick up on the myth? There are people in the story that tried to gather the manna and store it and keep it, and it rots and it goes bad. And the basic point is, no, you need to trust God more. You need to have confidence that the fount will keep producing for you, that it is inexhaustible, and that your particular hold on it should always be nourishing but never final. I think that's a beautiful. I hadn't thought about that. That is a beautiful.
I actually, man, I had a new thought there, and this has been so. I probably should not springboard into anything else that's going to keep me talking. I feel like I can talk to you for hours and hours, but the meaning crisis, the haven't read the books yet, but I'm sure they're great, so I'm recommending them. But I'll definitely recommend the lecture series for anybody who would like to hear more about a very complicated, consistently relatable, consistently real from someone who has a palpable passion for it yourself. And so I just want to say I really appreciate that. I've really appreciated this conversation. And yeah, did you have a closing thought at all based on anything that we've said?
I would like to thank all the people that I've worked with, Christopher Mastropietro, Filip Miscevic, Anderson Todd, Jinsun Kim, Thalia Rancidis, Daniel Gregg, Adeline Abramian, Hannah Cho, Philip Miscevic. There's just a whole bunch of people, and Leo Ferraro, my ongoing partner in crime. I couldn't be where I am without the fantastic work that I get and that I have done and I continue to do with Leo. And I think the foundational work for me that I got to do with Tim Lillicrap, Blake Richards on relevance realization. I just want to keep thanking all these people. I'm doing that because I want to remind readers that although I'm speaking and I take responsibility, personal responsibility for what I'm saying, I'm not trying to dodge that. I do want people to understand how many other people I rely on and how many people.
Oh no, you. Oh, sorry, you froze up. How many people you rely on? I heard.
Oh, how many? I stopped.
Oh.
Are you there? Are you there?
Yes.
I can't hear you. Are you still there?
Oh, yeah.
Now I can hear you. Okay,
great.
The glitch is gone. I froze. I stopped speaking as soon as you said that. I'm just saying all the people that I rely on in the past on an ongoing manner. It's very important to give them due credit and to thank them.
Well, it's
thank you
with your view. Oh, thank you, and thank you. It's very consistent to your non-autodidactic notion to want to. All of your ideas have been run through these other wonderful people, and that's what I'm kind of trying to do because I don't have access to all the same wonderful people that are obsessed with these same issues as I am. Nothing against the people in my life, but this has been very, very helpful, very formational for me. So. With that, I'll say
one more thing, Aaron. One more thing. Sure. I think you should email Paul Vanderklay and try and get on his show. He would be very interested to talk to you. Very interested.
Paul
Vanderklay, yeah, for sure.
I did, yeah. I spoke to him. He's one of my other ones in the can.
Oh, so you right? So you were on his show.
Well, no, he was on mine, but I don't know that I'm not noteworthy enough to be on his show, but it was very interesting to talk to him and. I want to talk to Jonathan Pajot. I want to talk to.
That would be really good. That would be really good.
Yeah, I want to talk to Peter Boghossian.
Yeah, I think so.
Peter Boghossian.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of people I'd love to talk to. So anyway, thank you very much. And
thank you very much. So just let me know when it's up, when you've posted the link, and is this going up on YouTube? Is that
yes,
is that what you
said? It will.
So just let me know what's up, and then I'll promote it through my network. Thank you very much. Great pleasure, Aaron. Great pleasure. Very much.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.